But we ended up, because of all of the delays, getting in the water about a little after 12 noon, and then getting out of the water maybe 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock as the sun was going down. And then just loaded up and came back to Lafayette. The interesting thing about launching off of an interstate and then retrieving your boat onto an interstate is the fact that it was a very, very gradual incline. Unlike a boat launch that allows you to get your boat into the water and send it off, this was a situation where you had to back half of your car down into the water to get your boat floating deep enough to get it off. But we managed to go in and retrieve the boat back on the trailer and came away feeling like we had really done something that day. And people want to assign all sorts of heroics to it, but I honestly have to tell you, it was really not much like that because we were excited to do it, we wanted to do it, we were 2 hours down the road, and we were compelled to do it. The word went out, and we had the facility to do that. And it also, in a cliche-ish sort of sense, provided a great father-son memory, which we obviously, will just never forget.
All right, that was one of the extras off of this DVD, New Orleans Music in Exile. I'm going to assume that you can purchase that just about anywhere online. It's a Stars production, so if you're interested in it's a story.
I'm sorry.
Well, when y'all talk about the computer models or showing this, is the computer taking all the conditions from X number of storms and comparing it to the existing conditions?
No, well, most of the computer models that we use right now are fairly sophisticated. They're not climate-based models. They take current conditions, and the computer models that we use, there's all sorts of different flavors. There's the day-to-day models that we use, which when we're looking at stuff, there's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different models that we use every day, 2 or 3 that we really rely on. Hurricane models are very different. They have different physics packages, different chemistry packages, and they're geared to model hurricanes specifically in tropical atmospheres, and they're much finer resolution. They can be run right over the storm. So you see a lot of that these days where we show you the computer model, the spaghetti plots, and each one's got different plots. There's actually one in those spaghettis that is actually what we call a climatological model that says, okay, hurricane here on this day, this is where it normally goes. That's in the mix, but our numerical models and the more sophisticated models more than outperform that model all of the time, 100% of the time in the last 15 years. Sometimes, though, that information is misconstrued by a weather guide that's showing, hey, look, this one model says it's going up to the upper Texas coast, while the rest of them are curling up the east coast. And sometimes they're misinterpreted even by the guy that's showing them, or girl that's showing them on air. But all the models are sophisticated, taking current information, current satellite data, current hurricane hunter data, current data that they fly, also high-level missions over the flights. All of that data is in the mix, but it still takes several hours before that data goes in, the models spit it out, and then it's assessed. And sometimes the models get it right, and other times they don't get it quite right. The Hurricane Center bases their forecast on the consensus of the models, and then they'll throw a little bit, well, maybe we're going to go a little bit to the right of the cone, especially since New Orleans may be in the mix for a hurricane evacuation. Then there's a geopolitical decision that is made because people 36 or 24, 36, 48 hours out have to make a decision on whether to evacuate a specific area. And it becomes very dicey because for every 1 mile length that you evacuate anywhere across the Gulf of Mexico, it costs $1 million a day in commerce, in logistics. So that's why they weigh that information. They're trying to be as precise as possible and don't vary too much on their forecast tracks, even if the models are starting to swing one way or the other. That's where I come in and say, hey, the models are a lot left of the guidance right now, so we'll see what the next one says. Jim?
Well, a lot of us have noticed, even with all of those all of that complexity you talked about, that you ought to become a lot more accurate in predicting where these things are going to hit a lot earlier than it ever was. Those of us who lived through hurricanes in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we pretty much had to listen and say, okay, it's going to be between Pensacola and Brownsville.
Right.
And it may get Tuesday, but then maybe Thursday. And it's just remarkable when you look at a storm that's generating off Yucatan, and I've seen you do it on your stuff. You can predict that it's going to hit Sycamore Point. I'm just taking that as an example. And it does, a week later or so.
Yeah, we're getting better on where we think the storms are going to make landfall. The average 24-hour forecast, we can be off 70 miles. Average 48-hour forecast, it's about 120, 130 miles. We've been narrowing that cone of uncertainty, but that intensity forecast is still, we still have big problems with that. And specifically in the Gulf of Mexico versus East Coast storms, Gulf of Mexico storms are much harder to predict intensity-wise than East Coast storms because of the Florida loop current that you have out there that is an extra vitamin B12 injection. Sometimes, not all the times, the storm has to be receptive to it. And then you have other influences coming off the Mexican plateau, the upper Texas coast, and maybe coming in from, back-ending in from the Appalachian Trail mountains. So there's still a fair bit of unpredictability, but as long as I've been doing this, the knowledge and the computer and the empowerment has really helped us be able to forecast. And now we're at the point where 2 weeks out, I can say, this Madden-Julian oscillation that's propagating, they call these Kelvin waves that propagate around the globe. This one is going to be getting down across the Gulf of Mexico about the time pressures are going to be low, so look for something to be troublesome 15 to 20 days out. We're at that point, but the devil's in the details. And sometimes you see all those signs 2 weeks ahead of time, and it's day after day. It's like, man, something's going to happen, and it doesn't happen. And Gustav was one of those cases where the models indicated something was going to be up in 10 to 14 days, and they were talking a big hurricane, but they kind of lost the details a week out. And then maybe 6 days out, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to have something. So it's a lot of it has to do with interpretation, and sometimes models trying to tell you something that something's going to happen, or specifically how this storm is going to react, but it's not overt. You kind of have to read through the lines.
One more small question. Have you ever been up in one of those Hurricane Hunter planes?
No. Oh, dude, I'd love to do that, but logistically it involves me going with a camera guy, making the 4-hour trip to Keesler, getting the 2-hour briefing, going on the plane ride, which is a 12-hour ride minimum. They can't guarantee you coming back to Keesler. And then ride 4 hours back to Lafayette. Then the news director says, put together a story on that. Oh, and by the way, yeah, we got that hurricane coming in tomorrow. So I can't do it logistically because of my schedule. I've always wanted to try maybe a late season storm that I know is going to curl away from the upper Texas coast. But for me, it's, and the general manager says, do not put product at risk. So that's going to either have to wait until I'm retired or out of the TV business. But I want to do it. I've worked with people that have done that, and some people have said they've had some pretty interesting rides. I just want to do it once. I don't think I want to do more than that.
I just have one point on that. I was fishing down in Point Ocean, which is an area south of Houma, where the Houma and Point Ocean Indians are, and wonderful fishing territory. And I was showing a picture of a big redfish that I caught to Robert Twilley. Does anybody know Robert? He went to LSU, and I don't know what the latest status is, but he was being interviewed for the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs at UL. He's a wonderful guy, and he is the uber scientist, really, as far as some of this is concerned. He was very interested in my redfish that I caught, and I was holding up very proud. But he told me what bothered him the most about it was behind me was a dead cypress tree. And what had enabled me to catch that redfish there was, and they do function pretty well in salty and some fresh water. But the salt water intrusion into that area, which had killed the cypress tree, was what keeps him up at night. And so with all of the canals that Rob referred to that were cut through there, allowing saltwater intrusion, that's a problem. Now, being out in my boat, I'd seen several of the structures, the 2x4 kind of structures that were used to house the Christmas trees that they were putting out there that were to help function as something of a barrier to the erosion. And I don't know whether that project has been abandoned or not, but I've seen a lot of empty shells of framing that were designed for those Christmas trees that aren't, really being used anymore. So that was one effort that was underway, at least. But I think until something happens with the silt from the Mississippi River, allowing it to nurture and to assist with the wetlands there and build that coastline back, I'm not quite sure what's going to be affected.
Yeah, it's really a complex situation, and we get, I kind of get involved with this, talking about this, especially with the whole global warming debate that goes on. But we have to also realize that our ground is also subsident. It is sinking. In fact, and this is where I really get on the global warming guys, because they're talking about the sea level rise. And the sea has risen a couple of centimeters over the last 20 or 30 years. I don't even know what the specifics are, but in the last 60 or 70 years, our land has been subsident and sank 2 to 3 feet along the entire coast. So subsidence or subsidence, the sinking of the land, is a much greater of an issue. And when it comes to the coastal wetlands, it is so complex, it's so dynamic, and we kind of see that playing out with this whole oil spill thing. I'm just trying to predict the currents and where the oil is going to go and where it's going to manifest, is that it is so complex on trying to protect the entire coast. I'm not sure physically if it can be done. And then there's money involved, and the money to fix it, and the money that may be interrupted fixing it. Are we going to shut down all our ports, the Port of Iberia, the Port of St. Mary, Intracoastal City, Freshwater? I mean, all these ports that we have along the coast are not going to, you can't have a dredging for the big ships to get in and out without properly allowing the silt to go around it and not silt over here in this one spot. It has to be an elegant, and it's going to be a very expensive solution. And I don't know what it is. It's beyond my comprehension as a meteorologist, but physically as a physical scientist, I don't know how they're going to do it. But it has to be done smartly, and it has to be done elegantly, because you are fighting forces of nature that people think they go out and they think they can seed a hurricane, or they can mitigate the intensity of a hurricane. Those things got more power and more energy than anybody could ever imagine, in trying to change those, the storms themselves, and then trying to change the dynamics of our coast. I don't know. I don't want to be overly pessimistic, but pragmatically, I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised.